Okay, now we're recording.
Okay. Well, this is October 31st, 2013, and I'm Dr. Sally Wilson, working with Dr. Jane Woodrow to interview Dr. Sephanie Zimmerman for the Ohio Psychological Association Oral History Project and the archives. So we're pleased to have you with us.
Thank you.
And Dr. Zimmerman has an important history in Ohio psychology by virtue of more than a couple of her efforts. She is a past president of the Ohio Psychological Association. She has been a consultant to the professional school, and she's worked in varied contexts. She was a co-founder of Ohio Women in Psychology. But before we get into these things, we often invite people to talk about anything they wish to talk about in early history that contributed to your choice of psychology as a career, and then to talk about your training, if you wish, in those early factors.
Okay, well, I think I would like to talk about what I alluded to last night in the OWP meeting. In the first, I'm not sure exactly how many years, but perhaps 40 years, there had only been 5 women who'd been president of OPA. And the 5th of those was Dr. Joanne King. And Joanne felt that there was a need for a women's focus group or organization. So she appointed me as a chair of a committee. This was like in October or November. And she said, you know, we don't have meetings over the summer. You need to be at the point where you're going to have all of the qualifications met to become a member, have a representative on the Board of Trustees by April. And I don't remember exactly, well, we had had some focus groups before, so we had some names and addresses from that. I don't remember how we got the rest of them. But we sent out these applications for membership, and if memory serves me well, and it may not, it was somewhere between 25 and 30 people. I think it was closer to 30, and that we had to have 25 in order to serve on to have somebody on the Board of Trustees of OPA. So we got all of that done in that period of time, and we also made out bylaws, and which were to some degree fly by the seat of the pants, but I don't think they were too bad. They've been changed a little from time to time. And we had quite a number of people from that period of time who have stuck like glue to Ohio Women in Psychology, and have still are around. So a lot of the founding people are still very active in the association. I got too bogged down at some point in some other things in my life, as well as some other things in OPA, be able to do exactly the same, but my sentiment has always been there. And I was very glad that Joanne...
Why did Joanne pick you? What had you done before that made her think you would be a good person to do this?
I'm not entirely sure why she picked me.
Oh, okay.
But I think that she believed I could get the job done. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And
had you been doing other things in OPA before that?
Well, by that time I might have been a member of the ethics committee by then.
Okay.
So that may be, the connection that she had with me. I felt like she was kind of mentoring me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not positive about this, but I think after Joanne's presidency, the next woman psychologist to be the president of OPA was me. Mm-hmm. There wasn't anybody in that gap. Mm-hmm. And so her wanting to make sure that women were representative was one of the things she had had on her agenda for that year.
Okay.
And So that's how that all came together. But I was talking a little bit last night. The first meeting we ever had, a focus group or whatever, was at Salt Fork State Park, which is way out on the eastern front of Ohio, and an enormous sprawling building. And we finished going to a meeting or a workshop or whatever it was, and I wanted to go back to my room and put my feet up. However, I have a friend by the name of Jane Woodrow who said to me, "No, you have to go." I said, "Look at where that meeting is. It's a half a mile walk from here. My feet are killing me." "You have to go to the meeting." I had no idea what all that was going to be leading up to.
Could we back up a little bit more and tell us how you even became a psychologist?
How come I became a psychologist?
Yeah.
Well, I am sure that part of the influence is my father, who is a psychoanalyst. I knew I didn't want to be a psychoanalyst. Most people don't have 7 to 10 years to spare to get a full analysis. And I had majored in college in sociology. But by my junior year, the end of my junior year, I realized I really wanted to be a psychology major. So I went to George Washington University over that summer and took a psych course. Because all at that time I had had in psych was a year intro, and then this course that I took over the summer, and then I took 9 credit units, in other words, 3 classes in psychology in the fall, 3 in the spring. So by the time I graduated, I had a double major because I had all finished all but 1 course of sociology by the end of my junior year. So I had plenty of space to do that. How I got to Ohio was we had a new chair to the psychology department, and I was interested in going to graduate school. And one of the places I had applied was University of Connecticut for the psychology program. Well, without consulting me about it, they instead shifted me over to counseling psychology. And, you know, if they had like 6 courses that were required, the same prof was teaching like 5 of them. So I think I'd even gotten to the point of getting ready to send my money in, but I wanted to talk with the chair of the department. And he said, you know, that's not a good idea. You know, you're right about that. You need a much more diverse, population of professors so that you get more points of view. And so he said that he had been at one point, I'm guessing, a student of a fellow who was on the faculty at Ohio University, who was at the very end of his career. And he contacted him and said, no, I have a student I think would fit in well with the program. And but meanwhile, that summer, having graduated from college with a major in sociology, of course I was trained to do a vast number of things. I could observe people, or I could observe people, or I could observe people. So I got involved. It was Johnson was president. It was Great Society. You may remember some of that. You're probably too young for that one, but the Great Society with all of this social change that Johnson had made his objective during his presidency. And so there was a course where you could be trained to be a counselor in a youth opportunity center. And you have to take an exam first, and Cynthia, and you had to have an exam first, which I passed, and then they had 70 places across the country, all universities, where they were sending people, but they didn't send people from Maryland to the University of Maryland, or people from Ohio to Ohio State. They did some, certainly, but they mixed everybody all up. So I was assigned to Ohio State, and that's where I was. And so by the time I finished the 8 weeks of didactic stuff, they were talking about reaching the unreachables. That was supposedly going to be our goal. We did some canvassing of some poor neighborhoods, and what I discovered as we were doing this, that the unreachables didn't want a thing to do with us. They were frightened by us. They wanted us to go away. And so we were only going to reach the reachable, just like everybody else. And then I had to spend a month at a YW or a YMCA in some sort of urban area. And I discovered that I was going to have to stay at the Y in downtown Baltimore, which did not appeal to me particularly by that time anyway. And meanwhile, I'd been accepted at Ohio University. And so you could stop the program when you were done with the 8 weeks if you wanted. You didn't have to do the other part. So I stopped that. I finished it on a Friday, drove down to Athens, Ohio, and started graduate school on Monday. Or registered Monday, whatever. And so that's how I happened to get to Ohio. And my first year down at Ohio University, I stayed in a private dormitory that had actually really good food. It was a new facility on the campus, and my folks had said they would pay for my first year of graduate school as a graduation present from college. Well, I had a assistantship. They didn't have to pay anything there, so they paid for that year. And so that's how that all got started. And then after that, made a friend, and we rented a place together and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So anyway, that's how I got into psychology, and also how I got into Ohio. That was
then
purely
somehow,
chance.
Somehow you got involved with Ohio Psychological Association. How did that happen? How did you get into Ohio Psychological Association, OPA?
Ohio State was just offering the facilities. I had passed an exam to get into the program.
OPA.
OPA. How did you get into OPA?
How did I get into OPA?
Right.
Oh, now you're really taxing my brain. Let me see.
Write you a note.
I think that the association came through the professional school of psychology. I think, because there were several people who were there who were very active in OPA, and I think I was encouraged to join at that time. That would have been somewhere in the mid to late 1970s.
So were you a student member? Did you come in as a student or after you graduated?
No, I came in after my degree.
Because if you were at the professional school, that must have been after you were already in practice. You were already in practice.
I was already, at that point, yes, I was.
At what point were you supervising students from the professional school? Was that very early in its years?
Well, yes, they were looking for venues to send their school professional psychology students to, and we were among people making donations to get that university program started. And so it's through that connection that I got into supervision. Now, I'll tell you my favorite story about that. The students came to my house in Lima for their sessions, for their supervision. So they were the ones making the trek. And this one gentleman I was working with came in one day, was really angry. really angry because somehow he was going to have to take some extra classes in professional psychology this other guy wasn't going to have to take. And he was really upset about it. And I said, you know, you're absolutely right. You have every right to be just as mediocre as he will be. And he stopped, and he looked at me, and it reframed the whole thing for him. As he was getting this extra training that this other guy wasn't going to have. Yeah. And so then the light bulb went on in his head, and he wasn't so upset about it after that.
Good.
You have many years of experience as a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
You've probably seen some trends, some developments in psychology that you might want to talk about. We also ask people what you see as the important focus for the profession in the future.
Okay. Well, let me talk about the future first, because I've done more thinking about that. I have taken training in a couple of non-traditional kinds of therapy that get very rapid results. One is EMDR, which I imagine you're familiar with, and the other is thought field therapy, which you may or may not be familiar with, in which you are treating various meridians for different glands, organs, and systems of the body. And I had been doing the thought field therapy since '99 and the EMDR since 2000. And people can come in with a problem that is suitable for one of these things, and we may still want to talk about why it happened and what needs to happen in the future or how to resolve it, whatever. But then I plug them into one of these if it's appropriate. And it's like fast forward, sometimes by a very long period of time. You have somebody, for example, who has a phobia and can't, whichever phobia it is, can't go out in public or whatever their phobia is. And little by little, you try to desensitize them till they get to the point where, you know, they can start functioning in this new setting. Well, with the thought field therapy, you can do that with one session. So the result of that is that sometimes I don't see patients as long as other therapists because they get better sooner. And but it's very rewarding work. And the difference between the two techniques in terms of why you would choose one versus the other, the EMDR, you have to re-experience the trauma over the course of the session. Of course, then at the end of the session, or whenever if it's been 2 or 3 sessions, whatever it is, then it's gone. I mean, but you have to re-experience that. Well, with the thought field therapy, there's no such necessity. You can just treat it, period, and get good results. And while I know that a lot of people think maybe that thought field therapy is not a valid school of psychology, that comes from China, it comes from India. I think this happens because 2 of the people who took the courses that I took from this guy in Pennsylvania, who was sort of the founder of this group, whose name was Gregory Nicosia in Pittsburgh, took his course, and these 2 guys wrote a book on it. And I have a feeling that a lot of people who are counselors or whatever read the book and decided from the book that they could do the treatment, which of course they couldn't. And so it came off looking like a hoax. But a properly trained person, I will tell you, I've never ever had a case where it didn't at least do something effective. Never. Now, how many kinds of treatment can you say that about? Not very many. Okay.
Excuse me, is there a coffee someplace up there? You're kind of talking. This way?
And you're tapping treatment meridians, various glands and organs of the body. I'm tapping along with the patient. Well, this is the treatment meridian for the thyroid gland. And it's very important to this work. You do quite a bit of things that has its own little nickname. It's called the gamut. You're tapping the gamut. Well, my hair had become very sparse on my head. I was thinking I was going to have to go somewhere and have hair sewn into my scalp or something. Because you could see all the way back to here. Even if I spent 45 minutes undercombing it, you could still see the sunlight on my scalp. And I'm tapping away with patience, and see the little hairs? I don't know if you can see them. The little shorter ones? That's from the thought field therapy, because this is tapping the treatment meridian for the thyroid gland. I probably have, I don't know, 8 to 10 times the amount of hair on my head now that I had when I started doing this work. And in addition to that, being hypothyroid all those years, my hands would be ice cold all winter long. This was over the summer. I took the training, and I realized come winter my hands hadn't gotten cold. So the patients had a lot of faith in it because they could see what was happening to me.
Improvements in you.
One of the questions we ask is about your reflections on Ohio Psychological Association and the direction it has taken over time.
Well, I didn't take class at Ohio State.
No.
Ohio Psychological Association.
Psychological.
OPA.
OPA.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what you're asking about.
Well, you were president at a time of transition from one model of leadership to another.
Okay.
And what do you think of the course of the association since then?
Well, now I'm not close enough to it now, I think, probably to be a good candidate to describe that. But I can tell you that over the time I was involved, I began serving on the Board of Psychology as the representative from OWP. And then I became the representative of the Ethics Committee. And then I became the finance officer. And then I had the... So I kind of moved along.
Right.
And the association was going through a period of growth. When, in the early days of OPA, we had Henry Seaman as executive director. He was one of the first executive directors of a psychology association in the United States. He had a lot of high visibility. And if something needed to be done, either the secretary did it or Henry did it. As the association was getting bigger and more people were getting involved in these committees, there were committees that were taking over different pieces of the action that had all been under Henry's umbrella at one point in time. And a lot of the people who were chairing those committees got very frustrated with him and felt like he was being somewhat obstructionistic, that he was having difficulty letting go of the reins. And of course, he didn't like that people were butting into what he saw as his terrain. And so one of the things that happened was there were a growing number of people on the Board of Trustees who were very frustrated with Henry and didn't like working with him. My own personal feeling toward Henry was I loved him like an uncle. He mentored me when I had been writing articles as the chair of the ethics committee, and he mentored me when I was new finance officer, and he was a wonderful man. I just adored him. But this was all coming to head in terms of what was going on with the Board of Trustees and Henry, and of course this landed on my year as president of the association. Of course.
Great fun.
But I felt that it was coming. And my parents live in the DC area. While I was home visiting them, I had an appointment with Ray Fowler, who was the executive director of APA. And I wanted him to know what was going on because of Henry's high profile. And he could see that I was kind of torn emotionally about it. But he said, you know, you have to do this and you have to do that. And if it means moving on, that's what it means. And he suggested a couple things I might do. Unfortunately, I took his advice. It didn't turn out to be such good advice. But in any case, that's how concerned I was about it, and I wanted somebody at APA to know what was going on. So, as it turns out, Henry was wanting to have some kind of retirement money. Now, when he signed a contract with OPA, there was no mention of anything like that. So he had no understanding that that was going to be, he had no reason to have any understanding that he would get that somewhere down the road because it had never been discussed.
Yeah.
Okay, well, he was wanting that. And so this was another dynamic that was going on at the same time. And so anyway, the situation just got more and more tense at the Board of Trustee level, and I had the great misfortune on my 5-person executive committee of having the 2 most polarized individuals in the association on my 5-person committee. One way over here, we have to get rid of Henry, he's awful. One over here, you know, I love him like a brother. He's a wonderful guy, and I'm in the middle of all of this. And so...
Sounds like it was a tough time for you. It was a tough time for you?
It was a very tough time for me, yes it was. And
we came through it.
Yes, and Henry got some retirement money.
He got retirement money.
Well, actually, I had talked with people who had been in other associations who were not psychologists, social workers, other people that I knew. And they say, oh, we had that happen in our association. And I said, well, what happened? Well, you know, about a quarter of the membership dropped out. Well, the membership split in half and the other half had made up their own association.
Oh dear.
So this is the kind of things I'm hearing, and I'm thinking to myself, what do we need to do that will keep us from having this same outcome?
Right.
Okay? And it was my feeling that if we gave Henry a chunk of change, we're talking about $100,000, $10,000 for 10 years, okay, that the old guard people would feel that he was getting treated reasonably enough that they wouldn't quit. So here I am desperately wanting to get this accomplished, and having 2 people on my committee, my executive committee, who would vote against it. So the 3 of us who would, and one of the 3 that would was the immediate past president. It was Dick Gennardi, and he was going through some very difficult times in his marriage and his personal life. And I knew I could replace him with another past president, but the recent past presidents that were going to come up would not have wanted to give him the money either. So I had to get this accomplished, where Gary and Dick and I were the 3 people who said yes on the executive committee. We did make that happen. But I had to really kind of carry Dick on my back, so to speak, to make that happen.
Well, good. So somehow it all worked out and the association moved ahead and we didn't lose.
Well, I think I appointed Francis Strickland to head a committee to see what was going on and to make recommendations.
Right.
And
that
the
was a
reason
good move. And Frances did talk with us when we interviewed her about that. So that worked out well.
Yeah.
So,
well,
Are there other topics that you would like to comment on? We could go into details, but we have some time limits.
right, we have
all right,
time
well,
limits
let
here,
me just
so-
tell you a little more about it, okay, and then I'll be done.
Okay.
So I felt like I was carrying Dick on my back, basically, trying to get him through this. And then once we got that vote, then he he resigned from the executive committee. Ken Drude came on to take his place. But when the report was done, that Frances did, and she sent me a copy of it, I started to hyperventilate because there were some things that I thought were stated in a more negative way than they needed to be. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah.
But I just felt there were a few things. She got kind of toe-to-toe with me and said, you know, you wanted me to do this committee, you know, and this is what's going to say, period. So I was like, well, she'll have to live with it. No, she had a Teflon coating by the name of Ted Strickland, and I ended up being the one who was perceived as having been in charge of that report, which I was not. Now, that made things a little more of a challenge, and it meant that at the APA level, and I had just been elected to be OPA's representative to Division 31, which is of state and psychological associations, at that time. And boy, oh boy, did I ever get the cold shoulder. I was treated like somebody who had tortured this man or done cruel things to him. So that made it a little tougher yet. Then he actually resigned in the spring. Then I had to go down to central office one day a week and sort of supervise what was going on down there because they didn't have a director. So that was another way which I was being pulled. And I hesitate to try to even figure out how many hours a week I was putting into OPA. But I did find myself sometimes falling asleep on my feet standing in the kitchen.
Having served under you when you were ethics chair, I know how many hours you tend to devote to
Right.
professional matters.
Right. And eventually you received the Distinguished Service Award for all of that hard work. You eventually got the Distinguished Service Award
Yes,
for all
I
that
did.
hard work.
I most certainly did.
So you were recognized. Yeah. And that may be a good place to call this to a close.
I think
Well,
so.
you know, I suppose it was a good thing that it was me at that
Yeah.
time. But when I watched some of the newer presidents coming in, Dave Hayes in particular, very, very skilled at leadership. And there were some things that he didn't leave up to the group where he just said, let's do it this way. And I was sorry I hadn't seen that particular behavior. One of the
Yeah.
things that was fascinating about being on the board of trustees was you got to see everybody's style of leadership,
Right.
and that was fascinating.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Are we done?
I think we're
I
done,
think
unless
we're
you
done.
have one sentence to
You have
go.
one sentence.
One sentence to
Well, I
go.
don't know. Anything we haven't asked you that you
Okay,
really want to say?
I probably donated 15 years of my life to the Ohio Psychological Association, and then my personal life took me in a different direction. I couldn't do that anymore. But the love that I had for OPA and for all of the friends that I made in OPA, of course, it's a palpable thing. And you know, I just was so sorry that we had to have that issue with Henry. But eventually, Gary Danowski apparently talked with Henry about it and said, Henry, I don't think Seth had anything against you. So then Henry came to me at a convention and sat down and said hi and chatted.
Wonderful.
And so I was glad that, because that, you know, things get so distorted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and so anyway, it was the presidency from hell, and it cured me of any wish to ever be president or anything again.
Oh, dear.
Now I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Are you going to build